Shocking details in a new report from the Senate Judiciary Committee, suggesting an elaborate scheme by former President Donald Trump to get the Justice Department involved in overturning the results of the election. NewsNation White House correspondent Allison Harris joining us live. So, Allison, tell us what is in that report.
Well, Nicole, this is the most comprehensive report that we have to date on what former President Trump, his administration, and allies of his in the Republican Party did to try to overturn the results of the presidential election. The 400-page report released by the Senate Judiciary Committee today is a culmination of an 8-month-long investigation. It states that former President Trump directly and repeatedly asked DOJ leadership to denounce the election as corrupt in phone calls and in meetings from the White House. It states that his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, asked the acting attorney general to initiate election fraud investigations. It states that allies of the president continually pressured the DOJ to launch these investigations. And it states that the former president forced the resignation of one U.S. attorney and named another in hopes that that U.S. attorney would, quote, do something about the claims of election fraud. It also states that the DOJ inserted itself as an issue in the election by violating its own long-standing policy and practice of not looking into claims of voter fraud before the votes were certified. The report names one DOJ lawyer in particular, that's Jeffrey Clark, as being a key player who helped former President Trump and even supported his claims of election fraud. This report, in summary, details a president who was taking extreme measures to stay in the Oval Office.
It was an incredible moment, which most Americans didn't even know was going on. We were a half step away from a full-blown constitutional crisis.
These claims of election fraud by the former president have been discredited. There have been lawsuits. There have been audits. Those audits are ongoing in some instances, none of which have found evidence of widespread election fraud. This morning, Republican Senator Chuck Grassley released a GOP version of these findings, which sum up the report as President Trump listened to his advisors and then he followed their recommendations. The former president, his demands to investigate the election fraud continue to this very day. Last month, Mr. Trump sent a letter to Governor Greg Abbott of Texas requesting an audit there. Trump won the election in Texas by 6 points. The Secretary of State's office is now doing what it calls a full forensic audit in the top 2 Democratic and Republican counties in Texas, Harris, Tarrant, Collin, and Dallas counties. Nicole?
And still no evidence of widespread fraud. All right, Allison, thank you for that.